Hi, I'm Trevor Hunter.
And I'm Jimmy Lewis.
And this is the Dirt Bike Test Podcast. And today we're talking about the 2021 Yamaha YZ450F. We just wrapped up our first day of riding on the new machine out at Glen Helen Raceway today. We had 3 different test riders spanning different sizes, weights, skill levels, speeds, etc. And we've put quite a few hours on the Blue Crew machine today.
Well, as many hours as you can at Glen Helen without knocking yourself silly, which I managed to do. And this is an interesting bike because the YZ450 seems to do really good in magazine comparisons, but top level racers seem to struggle with it. So it's kind of an interesting bike, and you never really can trust your editorial sources. Maybe it's just because the Yamaha PR and testing guys are so nice to hang out with. They make everybody feel good, and that's why the bike does good. But those guys have even been involved in some of the testing for the factory teams. So what's new for 2020, Trevor?
Not a whole lot.
Or 21, actually.
Yeah, so the 2020 machine was heavily updated. But for 2021, they stuck to just a new look. They updated the plastics to have blue side plates and number plates. And then the forecards are black. And then just some new graphics. So that's the changes for 2021. And they also introduced what they call a Monster Edition, which is the same YZ450F as the standard edition, just with the black Monster replica graphics.
I think it costs about $200 more. And really, then Yamaha said it's not a factory edition because we want you to be able to modify it the way you want to.
Onto the power. This might be where kind of the Yamaha shines for a multitude of reasons. One, the engine is phenomenal, just how much power it packs into the rearward slanted engine. But also with the ability to tune the bike with Yamaha's Power Tuner app that you get on the App Store.
It's a free app. This is the cool thing about it, is that app is free, and that app is really determining me for myself and for most riders how much we like this bike. And I know in 20 the changes to the engine made it what we'll call a little bit more aggressive. And I didn't ride the 20, so the 2021 was my first try on this thing, and it definitely is a little bit more aggressive. So much so that I always talk about wrist to rear wheel connectivity, and the Yamaha has that in spades, like a lot of it. Maybe too much?
Yeah, I'd almost say too much for myself as well.
And you're a small bore rider. You're riding the 250 two-stroke a lot, and then also 250 four-stroke. So you always say, man, 450s are too much for me. And this bike, I ride 450s all the time, and I think this bike is a little bit too much. But then again, we're not really pro-level motocrossers, and that too much for us is just enough or maybe just right for them.
No, the bike has plenty of power for the average man, even high-level racers. I feel like it has plenty of power for them too. And like you said, with the Power Tuner app, you can adjust it to how you want the bike to react and to respond. We were joking around all day that none of us could keep the front wheel on the ground just with the stock mapping, just because the bike has so much power in it.
It was coming up off the ground, and it was. So with the app, they had a couple different maps. They put a TP3. I don't really know the numbers. I wasn't paying attention to it because I typically don't like the TP maps, which just stands for Travis Preston, one of their development guys. It's like his maps usually go off in a different direction from what I'm looking for. But then they put one that they called a magic map in, and they were both, I believe they were both supposed to be a little bit mellower, but I was still having the same problem where when I'm coming out of a turn, especially going up the hills, I couldn't just really get on the throttle all the way. I had to almost modulate the throttle so it wasn't lifting the front wheel, and I don't like to have to do that. I like to just, okay, I'm pointing in the right direction. I want to twist it and go.
No, I felt the same way with the stock map and even the TP 3.0 map. They were still way too aggressive for me. I think the best we had it was with that magic map in there. And for me, when I ride a 450, I kind of like to ride a gear high, try and be a little smoother on the throttle and kind of roll my corners a little better. So with the Magic map, I was able to have enough power to ride a gear high, especially the corners, and kind of open the throttle as I saw fit, and keep the front wheel on the ground for most of the time. I still had it coming up quite a bit, but as much improved over the stock and the TP3 maps.
And I went kind of one step more from one of those maps. And if you're interested in that map, for sure email us, and I have a copy of it, where I actually kind of shifted the where it kind of really starts picking up. I moved the fueling and stuff around. It's mostly, for me, it was mostly around 3/4 throttle, 3/4 RPM-ish thing. We started playing with trying to slow that RPM down by adding some fuel and maybe taking some ignition away. And it definitely made a difference. And the coolest thing about everything with the Yamaha is it has the button like the YZ450F has had for a little while, where it's just one quick click of the button and you can go from map A to map B, or 1 or 2, however they call it. And that way you can have, I would have a first half of the moto or first lap map in there, a start map, first lap map. And then I would probably have the map that I could click off the best lap times in, which would be the second map that I had in there, and just very quickly click it. And a lot of other bikes don't allow you that ease of having different maps that's done through your phone and a button to push. So whatever we say about the motor, like, dislike, aggressive, mellow, whatever, it's like you can kind of tune it into whatever you want. So the motor becomes a factor of what amount of testing you're willing to put in to get the delivery you want. I don't think it's the highest horsepower 450, but you'd be hard pressed to tell me that when you're twisting the throttle and going wide open. It's making all kinds of power, and it literally can be delivered however you like.
Moving on to suspension, Yamaha is stuck with their tried and true Kyoba components, front and rear. I've seen a lot of praise from both the media and consumers over the years. And out here at Glen Helen today, there are a lot of pros, really choppy, rough track. We were able to get a good feel for how the suspension worked.
And the biggest thing that I noticed right away is that it's kind of more aggressive. It sort of matches that little bit of aggression they've added to the engine character. It kind of came along in the suspension department as well. It's like the bike has a little bit more stiffness for a little bit more hold up, and just overall maybe it's sacrificing some of the comfort we used to have for more precision, I would say.
Yeah, I think going off the 2019 model, it kind of rode like a Cadillac and do everything well, especially if you're not super aggressive or super pro level rider. It worked really well. It could transition to a lot of different skill levels and speeds, whereas now this is more like a sports car where it's kind of racy and you dive in and out and just be more aggressive on the bike.
And we'll get into it a little bit more on the handling, but I think that the changes to the chassis, to a certain extent, work hand in hand with the suspension. And it's not that it's, I just want to say it's almost like it's going more in the direction of where the Showa components are, where it has a little bit more initial stiffness that kind of, it's like but it doesn't have the dead feel in the beginning. So it maybe it's transferring a little bit more of the what you feel on the ground to the rider, which I think is important for some guys just to have confidence on the bike, where the old one used to really absorb it. So it's like, the best way to describe it is I would say they've added 2 to 3 psi to the tires, the tire pressure, and now that's coming through in the action of the suspension. And other than that, it kind of still does the same stuff. It seems like it has really good control of the stroke. There's excellent, if not more, bottoming resistance in my feel. And for I'm on the heavier side at 200 pounds. I went initially. I started going, I think I need to go a little bit softer, and I didn't really like what that was accomplishing in the handling side of things, so I just left it, and by the end of the day I was right back to stock after playing around with a lot of different clickers.
Yeah, and like for myself and our other test rider, Tyler Belknap, we're like right around this 160 pound range, so we're kind of in the lighter side of the scale for this bike, and we actually softened up the compression front and rear 4 to 5 clicks, and we were able to get a little more comfort out of that. As you said, kind of adding it almost felt like adding tire pressure. We tuned that out with the going back out on the compression. in the handling department, the YZ450 does everything pretty well. It's kind of like an all-around chassis where it corners good, it's stable. It just does everything well.
I think the theme on this is it's become more consistent, and I always felt that Yamaha's, and I've liked the way that they've turned ever since they flipped the engine around, and they always seemed like for most riders there was always something like the turn entries weren't that good, or they really weren't that good in the middle of the turn, or then they had a problem exiting the turn, and all these changes they were always sort of chasing one to fix the other. And it's always had the same amount of stability. I wouldn't say it's the most stable bike or unstable by any means. So it's kind of like this middle of the road handling character. And it seems like they put the whole turn together now. It's like maybe it's not the best any place, but it's at least very consistent. And it doesn't matter whether you're turning in a rut or you're kind of in a kind of sandy, hoopy turn, or maybe it's a flat turn with chop. It kind of does all of them quite well.
Yeah, I think going back to that, just being more aggressive is where it kind of helps, especially in corner entry and coming into the corners. It kind of can be more precise, as you said, and just kind of you can tell the bike where to go. And
you can pick your line. It's not a mystery. Yeah. and never that it wasn't a mystery. It was ever like a mystery with that. Some of those bikes went into the turn really good, and then you'd be in the middle of the turn, and it's like, now I'm struggling. Or it would do the first two things we just talked about, and you get to the end of the turn, it's like, I'm not going the direction I want to be going right now and now I have to correct with some throttle. And this is where, when we talk about handling, be a combination, a package of everything, the more friendly I was able to make the engine character with the power tuner, the more the turning really started to come around for me. And a lot of it kind of settled on keeping the front end down, or at least keeping the front end where I wanted it based on my throttle control. And it works really good. I think the bike feels, and the positive of that stiffer active suspension, the more hold up, it makes the bike feel lighter. And I really did notice that the bike felt a little bit lighter than the older version.
Yeah, for sure felt a lot lighter, a lot more agile, and you can, as we said, you can pick your line and go there. Whereas before it was kind of just mushy and comforting, but it wasn't super precise.
Yeah. Some of the things the Yamaha gets bagged on for is it's a little bit wider bike. Visually, for sure, it looks wider because you've got airbox channels running up to where the gas tank used to be. They've got, that's narrowed up a little bit. It's gotten a little bit better, but I still do notice it. Doesn't bother me, but I notice it. Some other interesting traits I found are it does make airbox noise. It sounds different to the rider. It sounds louder because you're hearing some of it. But I also feel that that's minimized a little bit from in the past as well.
No, I feel all those same things, but like you said, it's not really. Once you spin a lap or two, it kind of just becomes normal. I don't really feel it affects the performance or my riding ability.
And you're a Yamaha guy that's riding KTMs now, so you get used to it quick. And at the suggestion of Jody Weisel from Motocross Action, we threw a taller seat on the bike. And Jody was actually out there kind of cruising around, and I always joke with him, and I say, Jody, what do we do to this thing? What's the MXA setting? And he goes, put a taller seat on it. And it was funny because my knees were telling me to do that because it feels like the cockpit is actually a little bit cramped. Tall bars, low seat, and that really started fixing some of that.
Yeah, my legs were telling me, my short end team were telling me to not put that tall seat on. But once we did, it really opened up the cockpit and just made everything feel where it should be. Like I said, the seat's kind of low, which doesn't bother me, but the bars do feel really high. That was something I would have changed. If it's like a personal bike, I'd put lower bars on there. But once you put the tall seat on, it kind of corrected that position to where the bars feel in a good spot and the foot peg of the seat were like optimal distance.
For me, it wasn't so much that I was kind of hoping it would hold me up a little bit higher on the bike and my knees wouldn't have to do so much work, going from sitting to standing. But what it did, because I think the seat foam was softer, is when I started accelerating, I got stuck. The seat actually worked like a little bit like a pocket, and it was holding me up a little bit higher, but it kind of like worked like a pocket, held me onto the bike. And I think since the foam was softer, I was still kind of sinking down to that point. And, the little, the half an inch or, 3/4 of an inch taller, whatever it wasn't as significantly different, but it was definitely a good improvement.
In conclusion, we're a fan of the Yamaha today. We could see it won our 2019 450 comparison, and since then it's undergone quite a few changes. And we say it's led to a more aggressive in nature motorcycle, but it still retains some of those Yamaha traits that we've come to know.
Yeah, I think I want to say it's getting a little bit more polar, but it's going the direction everybody's going. That little bit of more aggressive in the suspension might turn off some of the more novice or vet guys that were liking that cushiness. But that's not to say you can't tune that back into the current suspension. But I think when you start changing that, you're losing the sort of the direction where the motor's a little bit more aggressive, the chassis is a little more aggressive, the suspension's a little bit more aggressive. And so kind of take that for what it's worth. I think you're going to find, since they're designing and developing these bikes to start performing at the highest level, with their pro level racers and, aspiring pro level racers, this is the direction everything's sort of going. So that's what a motocross bike is these days.
No, it certainly fits the trend of what we see a lot of other manufacturers doing. Like you said, it works well for a lot of people, and some people may not favor it a whole lot, but it's not to say that they can't make it work for them just with some fine tuning and
no, the gem of that is the Yamaha Power Tuner app. So you can, you're never going to, the chassis is the chassis, there's ways to do it. But between clicking the suspension and tuning the motor, you can probably turn that bike into just about anything you need to in the motocross realm. And I think for that, Yamaha's done a really good job. So if you enjoyed this podcast, go ahead and share it with your friends. Check us out at www.dirtbiketest.com. And of course, you can follow us on all the different social channels at Dirt Bike Test. So for Trevor Hunter, this is Jimmy Lewis, and we will hopefully see you out at the track.